Hello, and welcome to our series on sex, gender, and engineering, where we explore the different behaviors and the impacts of those behaviors that women and other underrepresented groups face in engineering, work, and school as compared to men. I'm Denise Wilson, a professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of Washington, and alongside my personal experience in engineering over the past few decades, I have a broader interest in studying the issues that women and other underrepresented groups face in engineering. And especially, I'm interested in strategies to eliminate, reduce, or otherwise circumvent those barriers so that women, as well as other underrepresented groups, can have an easier time of it in their careers and technical fields. To that end, in today's session, I'm going to take a really brief look at hostile climate and sexual harassment in the workplace. And that would be the workplace outside of higher education. Higher education is a little bit different. So we'll start by just taking a brief look at what's going on in the workplace and move from there to the academic workplace in future sessions. So in engineering work, harassment is really common from higher to lower rank. A person with greater power, like a manager or supervisor, will often harass the person with lower power because the power differential reduces the risk that the target or the victim will report or retaliate for that harassment. Sexual coercion, or expecting sexual favors or enforcing punitive penalties for not cooperating in a sexual relationship, almost universally occurs across a power differential. But that's not the only place that harassment occurs. Gender harassment and unwanted sexual attention often occurs between coworkers. Typical example of this is a coworker who repeatedly pressures a woman to go out on a date with them, or makes comments regarding physical appearance of the woman that are inappropriate. So we generally believe that sexual harassment hurts the person who's being harassed. Most people won't argue with that. But what we don't often acknowledge is that sexual harassment hurts productivity and morale of an entire work group, regardless of how many individuals in that work group are being harassed. It's also a myth that only women are harassed at work. Men, especially those who do not exhibit traditional masculine behaviors or conform to traditional masculine behavioral norms, are also vulnerable to harassment. And while not legally a part of sexual harassment, sexual minorities are also harassed as a result of people in the workplace trying to enforce traditional masculine behavioral norms. This type of harassment, when people are being policed because they don't conform to traditional masculine norms because of their sexuality, is called heterosexist harassment. And while heterosexist harassment is definitely distinct from sexual harassment, both types of harassment tend to occur in hostile work cultures. And that brings us to a short discussion on hostile work cultures, especially in engineering and science fields. What are those hostile work environments? How do you characterize them? What do they look like? The hostile work environment is generally characterized by chronic behaviors that impair productivity and well-being, not just of the person who's being treated poorly, but also those who work around those individuals. Hostile work environments that target or discriminate against a particular gender are illegal under Title VII in the workplace. In technical fields, those hostile work environments are often characterized as either hard hat or geek cultures. These terms are not meant to disparage or put down the social culture of engineers or scientists, but instead they're used to define and describe certain types of hostile cultures at work. So let's take a look at that. Hard hat culture refers to engineering and other positions that operate in the field. Generally, women may be isolated in these situations. They may be the only female in the field operation. And hard hat culture is characterized by vulgarities, sexual humor, and predatory behavior. In other words, sexualized gender harassment Geek culture, on the other hand, occurs in more traditional white-collar office environments, and it's characterized pretty much by the belief that women don't have what it takes to be in that environment. In engineering, that means women are dismissed as not being as capable as engineers. They tend to be more dismissive and not openly predatory like hard hat cultures are, but both types of cultures are hostile, and often they are hostile to women and others who don't conform to traditional masculine norms. So here's an example of what it looks like to be up against geek culture, which predominantly operates in the white-collar office. 10 years ago, at a startup in the Northeast, Josephine had a boss who was big on nicknames. She hated every name he tried to call her, Josie, Joey, Joe, so they finally settled on Finn. Finn stuck. And she says, it turned out to be really useful to allow some of my colleagues to imagine I was a man. The emails Finn got were completely different from those received by Josephine. Some of them contained brutal locker room stuff that was hard to take, but some contained essential information for those who wanted to get promoted at the firm. Inside dope, who was in, who was out with the CEO, and information on cutting-edge business issues, where the new investments would be, what markets were being tagged for expansion, and so on. In sharp contrast, Josephine got the polite inquiries about the family and boilerplate stuff on company strategy. Josephine says, get yourself a Finn. He's as necessary today as he was in 1997. Back then, I thought that Finn would outgrow his usefulness, that there would come a day when Josephine was in the know. It's sad, but that day hasn't happened. So this doesn't seem openly hostile, but it is openly exclusionary. Women are left out of key information to advance their careers and improve their performance in the organization. So as such, this is an example of a geek culture, which is considered hostile. In a hard hat culture, we might find women acting differently and responding to the culture, seeing different behaviors that are also damaging and hostile. In these cultures, women often feel very conspicuous. Vulgarities and sexual humor permeate these types of workplaces. And for example, one woman said she stood out like a sore thumb. Another reported needing to do a whistle check on the clothes she wore to work. She just wanted to make sure that she didn't provoke a barrage of whistles and catcalls. So both of these cultures, again, are hostile, but they look very different. And while the data shown here reflect 2008 data for women working in science, engineering, and technology companies, which include but are not limited to engineers, we see that there are differences in who experiences these two hostile work cultures. But what we see across the board is that the percentages of people who reported that they experienced these hostile cultures are much too large. If the lowest number we have is that 19% of Caucasians reported being up against a hard hat culture, that's a problem. And to say that the numbers go all the way up to 57% is really not acceptable in a white collar or any workplace for that matter. But above and beyond that, some of the racial differences we see here are also striking. So let's take a look first at whites. If we look at white people, we see that 19% report being up against a hard hat culture, while 32% report being up against a geek culture. In general, fewer white people, fewer white women perceive that they face a hostile climate when they work as scientists or engineers, but these numbers are still far too large. But if we now look across racial differences, we see that racial and ethnicity differences are not the same for the two different types of culture. In a hard hat culture, it looks like African Americans face a hard hat culture more so than other races. While in a geek culture, it's Hispanic individuals who report facing the hostile geek culture. It's very interesting that this intersectionality not only affects sexual harassment, as we see in other sessions in this series, but also affects hostile culture and how people perceive their work environments in science, technology, and engineering. We also see that on the surface, it looks like white and Asian individuals have about the same rates of seeing a hostile geek culture at work, still far too high at 32%. But what we have to consider for Asian women is that Asian women working in science, engineering, and technology may likely have a tendency to underreport. And this has to do with the fact that they may be conforming to the model minority myth in the United States. All Asians face this model minority myth that they should succeed no matter what and are therefore less likely to report struggle. And for women especially, it seems that they may be less likely to report harassment or hostile working conditions. We do have other studies that show that Asian women underreport harassment, but whether that is what leads to the fact that whites and Asians are reporting the same levels of hostile geek culture remains to be understood. Next, we'll go on to another problem in hostile work cultures, and that is seeing women as less capable. Now, seeing women as less capable and doing or saying something about it is a form of gender harassment. But for now, let's zero in on this idea that women are less capable as engineers or scientists. And for that, we go back to 2005, where Lawrence Summers, then president of Harvard University, stated in quite a bit of academic speak the following. So my best guess, to provoke you, of what's behind all of this, the gender gap in science and engineering he's referring to. In the special case of science and engineering, there are issues of intrinsic aptitude and particularly of the variability of aptitude, and that those considerations are reinforced by what are in fact lesser factors involving socialization and continuing discrimination. I would like nothing better to be proved wrong. And he was proved wrong by his reaction and being fired from his position at Harvard University for these remarks. But above and beyond that, we have to wonder why he was so bold to put that in front of such a large forum of individuals. Was he just giving voice to a standard view that women are less capable in technical fields? The underlying belief to that effect, that women may be fundamentally less able than men to be successful in engineering, is not shared by all men or women. But when it shows up in the workplace, it can have a real subtle and pervasive undermining effect on women in the advancement of their careers. When we look at quantitative data along these lines, we can look at, again, the Athena report from 2008 that took a look at who reports that they believe in their workplace. Women are seen as intrinsically less capable. And what we see is that in engineering and tech, there's about a little more than a quarter of women surveyed believe that in their workplace, women are seen as less capable. Now, of course, that's way too high. And what we see is that engineering and tech have similar problems in terms of sexual harassment, having the highest rates of sexual harassment among science, engineering, and tech, as well as perceiving bias in performance evaluations. And finally, interestingly enough, we see that engineers, by a factor of 2 or more, experience getting unwanted attention from from their feminine appearance. And these results are all from women working in SET, and they're definitely disturbing in all 3 fields, science, engineering, and technology. The less capable message, let's take a look at some examples of how this materializes and manifests in the workplace. One woman says, upon meeting a woman at work, a male colleague assumes she is an administrative assistant. When he learns that she is in fact an electrical and systems engineer, the male colleague evinces surprise to her and exclaims, "Why, you don't look technical." This is subtle, it may be unintentional, but it sends a message to the woman that she doesn't belong in this environment. Another example, it's always surprising to the men to see me. It's like, what are you doing here? When I do contribute, my opinions and reasoning are always questioned. Are you sure about that? Whereas what the men say is taken as gospel. This kind of questioning erodes self-confidence. Over time, women begin to believe that perhaps their male colleagues are right. Maybe they don't have what it takes to excel. And this kind of thing, this less capable reverberation in meetings and workplaces, has been proven in the scientific research. It's been proven in controlled experiments that men who spoke up with ideas were seen as having higher status and were more likely to emerge as leaders. Women, on the other hand, did not receive any benefits in either their status or emerging as leaders from speaking up, regardless of whether they spoke up positively or prohibitively. Neither men nor women who spoke up about problems suffered a loss of status, but men and women both ascribed more status and leadership emergence to men who spoke up promotively compared with women who did so. So it's not only men who perpetuate the less capable message, it's also women in these subtle situations that go on in the workplace, in meetings and decision-making exchanges. So what we've seen here is we've seen that hostile work culture and sexual harassment go hand in hand, as well as messages about women being less capable. And they are definitely an area of concern at work for engineering, tech, and other workplaces, including science, although less so. In general, hostility and harassment are not pervasive in all workplaces, but when they are present and remain unaddressed, they impair productivity and well-being for everyone in the workplace. So that's just a very short introduction to sexual harassment at work, especially with attention to hostile work culture and sexist gender harassment, which deems women less capable in engineering and tech. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again soon for another session on sex, gender, and engineering.